There's been a lot of rain here in the UK recently. So much so that land that has been drained and reclaimed for centuries is, all of a sudden, under the risk of turning back into the sea. For example, a sea level rise of only a few meters reveals the now drained marshlands of the Fens in eastern England, and the extinct sea at Pevensey in southern England can, as of right now, be seen on flood warning maps. According to the historian Michael Hislop, the natural harbour first conquered by William of Normandy has turned into fields, and the castle that once guarded an important coast is just in the middle of a bunch of land now. But these aren't what this video is about. Instead, all of this had me thinking about something very peculiar I'd seen a little while ago. This is a hill in the valley of Glaslyn in Wales. Most hills here follow a pretty normal naming scheme, usually containing one of the many words for hill: Bryn, Pen, Allt, Carn, Mynydd, and so on. Except for this one. This one is called Ynys here, Long Island. No mention of a hill at all. But alright, surely it's just a metaphor. Does it stick out like an island in the middle of a field? Well, yes, but nowhere else in Wales is named like that at all. And the place is filled with hills. In fact, with very, very few exceptions, the word Ynys in Welsh exclusively applies to what you'd expect. Islands. Actual islands. In the sea. But what's interesting about Ynys here is that it's not alone. In fact, the majority of those very few exceptions occur right here, in the middle of the valley of Glaslyn, where nearly every single prominent hill is called an island. It is unlike, literally, anywhere else in the entire country. You don't have to remember any of these names, but from Ynys here we have the nearby Ynys Cerrig and Ynys Galch. We also have Ynys Ceiliog, Ynys Egweli, Hir Ynys, and Ynys Ifan. Finally, these names also occur quite a bit inland, as north of here we can find Ynys Ferlas, Ynys Fach, and finally, the largest of these islands, Ynys Fawr, alongside the last hill, Buch Glas, who just had to be different. As I said, apart from this collection of hills, some of the only islands I can find that aren't actually islands seem to be a peninsula in southwest Wales, a village named Llanynys in North Wales, and another called Ynys y Bull in South Wales. So what's going on? Why in this obscure rural valley in northwest Wales do we have an archipelago surrounded by a sea of grass instead of water? The first thought that came to mind was, well, how long has this been grass? Were these once proper islands? Looking on the website floodmap.net, I decided to see what would happen if you raised the sea level by a few meters, as those floods had revealed the old sea at Pevensey earlier, and while most of Wales wasn't affected by an otherwise Netherlands destroying 5-meter rise, one area in particular looked very different. The Glaslyn Valley, with its collection of inland islands, suddenly became completely submerged. What had happened here? Looking at an old map from 1839, I couldn't spot anything different. The Glaslyn River still just ran through solid ground, the nearby town of Porthmadog was still there, and these islands were still just hills. But by looking at a map made only 4 decades prior, a very different picture emerged. Because, all of a sudden, 2 towns in the area, Porthmadog and Tremadog, aren't there. In fact, the entire valley isn't there, instead being replaced by nearly 4 miles of a brand new gulf or inlet, labelled Traeth Mawr. I had never seen this before, and 13 miles of coastline disappearing is a pretty conspicuous thing, so I wasn't all surprised to learn that this had actually been staring at me in the face for years. On any map I could find produced prior to the 1800s, this sea, Traeth Mawr, was right there. Some authors made it pretty prominent too. On the Cambrian typus, the earliest known map of just Wales, the author shows this lost stretch of coast extending about halfway towards the other side of the ocean. A painting from 1834 of Traeth Mawr, one that I'd used in my video several times, seemed to show a load of sand. But another painting from 1818 of the same location, which is also a picture I've shown several times, seemed to instead depict quite a bit of water, extending deep into the mountains. Water that was deep enough to allow boats on it, and some pretty sizable ones too. But again, nothing is left of this. Well, almost nothing, but we'll come to that in a second. Miles of water were present in this medieval map, and indeed in maps all the way up to 1795. Dozens of them, many of which I'd been looking at for years. So what had happened to this missing sea? The answer lies, as it often does, with man. Well, with one man to be exact. William Madocks. According to the historian David Thomas, Madocks was a wealthy man with family from Denbighshire in North Wales. With his inheritance, he had bought an estate on what would have been the shores of this inlet, and he set about a tremendous task. The Dictionary of Welsh Biography does not call him an industrialist for nothing, and true to his surname, William Madocks envisioned turning what was then the small port towns of Porthmadog and Coastline into a proper dock that could serve the nearby slate mines. This new dock was called Porthmadog, humbly named after him, but how he achieved this is what we're really interested in. According to D. Thomas, beginning from the age of about 25, William Madocks began to enclose and drain thousands of acres of this missing medieval sea. Starting from around his estate, where the town of Tremadog, also named after him, sits today, aiming to eventually encompass the entire Gulf. By 1811, this process began to be truly underway, as with the permission of the British Parliament, Madocks created a contraption across the mouth of the Coastline with a very disappointingly boring name. A long ridge of rocks, road and eventually rail, known as the Cob. This wall severely limited how far the tide could travel in. The biologist P.M. Ryan notes that even in high tide, the seawater is still mostly kept out today, and all of this allowed for Madocks to completely change the landscape of this valley. According to G. Robinson, this sea, Traeth Mawr, likely looked a lot like the estuary to its south, the Madocks, and this can be seen here in that painting made only a few years after construction of the Cob had started. But soon, this would not be the case. I couldn't find a source for when the draining of the sea had been completed, so we can't know for certain when these islands no longer became islands. But by 1821, the construction of Porthmadog was underway, and in this map from 1833, the Coastline is shown carving its way through a field, rather than emptying out into a sea nearly 4 miles to its north. Our missing medieval water wasn't lost to a natural cause. It didn't vanish out of thin air. It was drained. These islands became no longer islands, entirely due to man-made causes. When I first started to go into this, I expected to find William Madocks as a sort of Loraxian bad guy, you know? Draining an entire gulf for a new shopping centre or a 24-lane motorway or a Thneed factory, but no, he doesn't really fit that bill. In the words of David Thomas, Madocks was a pronounced radical and a supporter of parliamentary reform. Not to mention what was once the waters and sands of Traeth Mawr are farms today. There's a salty marsh towards the north of the Cob, which is apparently a very rare habitat in the UK, but the rest are just fields. Interestingly, this wasn't even Madocks' original idea. He had read about the plans from another man, John Wynne, who had the same idea in 1625 but for whatever reason never went through with it. This photo on Wikimedia Commons by Christine Johnston calls the southwest of Tremadog a sea of grass, and that's an excellent pun. Because not only was it an actual sea only 200 years ago, but even today it's still, in a way, a sea, filled with almost a dozen islands that aren't actually islands anymore. What was once a large outcropping in the middle of the water, large enough for its name to mean big or great island, is now just a hill, and a small one, completely dwarfed by its surroundings. But its name preserves the fact that this valley, these fields, are not natural. There are several examples of islands that aren't properly islands here in Wales. To the south by the River Dyfi we have places like Ynys Las, Ynys Tachwedd and Ynys Hir, all enclosed within these sandbanks. But according to the historian G. Robinson, sediment deposits have changed the coastline of West Wales quite a bit, and I imagine that this is how places like these lost their island status. But Traeth Mawr sticks out, not only for its abundance of demoted islands, but for the reasons it got that way. This sea was drained ultimately by an industrialist, envisioning a port with a railway that he never got to see complete, all made for money of which he died without, having left the country broke for Paris, where he passed in 1828. Traeth Mawr didn't need to be drained, but it doesn't seem like Madocks did it out of a need to crush wildlife in the name of progress. He looked up to figures like Alexander the Great, but while he may have conquered Persia, Madocks sought to make his own mark on the map, literally. So while yes, Traeth Mawr did not need to go, at least Madocks' dream wasn't to turn it into a wasteland. At least this sea of grass with its islands that aren't islands is still there, and it didn't get turned into a 4,000-acre car park. I don't know though. I still wish I could have seen those sands. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you all for 100,000 subscribers. The next goal will be to reach 4.7 billion in the next 4 seconds. Okay, so we didn't quite reach that one, but it's okay, we can try again later.